I run to clear my head, to outrun the noise, the pressure, the expectations that never slow down. But somewhere along the way I realized you can keep moving and still be falling apart inside. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is stop, breathe, and let him restore you from the inside out. So, let's stop pretending we're fine and let God do what only He can do.
We are still in our soul care series. I think we have one more message after this. But this morning, I want to start with a few questions. First question is this: have you ever noticed how two people can experience the exact same moment and walk away with completely different interpretations of what happened? If you're married, you're like, 100%. Those dishes, they didn't do themselves. Have you ever been completely sure about what someone meant, though, the other question, only to discover that you had no idea what was going on? Have you ever had that happen? Just totally missed it. Like you're in the conversation, they ask for a review of the conversation, and they act like, what's wrong with you? Did you even listen? Were you even in the same room as me? Or maybe this happens to you. You replay maybe a conversation in your head again and again until by the end of it, you're convinced that the person that you had the other conversation with is the next villain in a Netflix series. You know they're going to be in it. You're just like, you're waiting. You've already got the title screen up. You're like, oh, I know they're going to show up. We all have these stories that we tell ourselves, right? We have these, we call them narratives. We have these stories because it's very normal. So if you do that, you're normal. We interpret. We assume. We fill gaps. That's what we do. If you think about conversations, they work a lot like this. First, we're trying to figure out what someone said when they said something to us, what they actually meant. We're trying to find the meaning. And then after that, we spend the next 10 minutes explaining what we meant when we said something. And that's how conversations can typically go. But we're constantly telling ourselves stories, sometimes over and over, and sometimes those stories are just lies we anchor into. We tell ourselves stories about what people actually meant. We look to figure out their intent, and we tell ourselves the story of someone else's intentions. Think about that one for a minute. We tell stories about what's happening around us. Some of you are going to tell stories that Lee Chamberlain came up here and told crazy stories at our church. That did happen. But there was also this really cool thing that he got his credentialing papers today, too. But you see how those stories are different. We tell stories about what the future holds. And sometimes, very often, those stories, they shape how we feel and they shape how we react. And sometimes they even creep in to how we see God. For some of us, those stories sound something like this: I'll never change. I'll never change. Or I've messed up too many times. I've messed up too many times that God could never use me. Maybe that was one of your stories. I have a record. They'll never give me papers. Maybe that was one of those stories. I'm always going to struggle. People wouldn't accept me if they knew the real me. Everyone else seems to have it all together except for me. Or some of you, control freaks in the room, if I don't hold everything together, it will all fall apart. But here's the truth. Not every story that you tell yourself is true. Not every story that you tell yourself is true. You see, sometimes the hardest battles that we fight, they're not happening around us, they're actually up here. They're happening inside our minds, and they can be so difficult. Paul addresses this in his letter to the church in Philippi. You see, he gives us powerful instructions. He's writing this letter while he's chained, guarded, in prison. He's not sure if he'll be released or if he'll be executed. Yet near the end of the book, in 4:8 of Philippians, he writes this. He says, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." If I use that as a filter, it's going to clean up my thought life. Truly. It'll keep a lot of the garbage out. But this is classic Paul, isn't it? He's saying this to a relatively young church, and honestly to us too, that you may not be able to control everything around you. Remember, this was in a Roman colony. They didn't have much control. You may not be able to control everything around you, but you do get to choose what story your mind continues to play. You can choose to fill the gaps, because that's what we do when we interpret, when we assume. We start to fill gaps to try to understand things. But you can fill those gaps with crazy town, right? Yeah, I know I say crazy town. Or you can fill it with grace, and you get to choose that. You see, notice what Paul focuses on. He doesn't start with behavior. He starts with our thinking. Because the life of faith, yes, it's what we do, but it's not just about what we do. It's what we think and what we dwell on and what we allow to take control of our minds. Because I think you probably have realized this by now, that our thoughts shape our lives. You can see this dynamic throughout the Bible, that two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different narratives. And then because of the different narratives, different reactions follow. Take the story in the book of Numbers. People of Israel are finally standing on the edge of the land that God promised them. They're standing there. Now remember, they had come out of generations of slavery in Egypt. They had been rescued through the Red Sea. And after this long journey, they're finally there. So Moses sends out 12 leaders, one from each tribe, to scout this land. Go look, go figure out what's going on there. They take time, they walk through it. They basically scout it out. They all see the same valleys. They all see the same fortified cities. They see the same powerful people living there. They also see that the land is just as good as God said it would be. In fact, it's so fruitful, it's so good, that they cut down a single cluster of grapes and carry it with two people. Now, I don't know about you, when I go to the grocery store, I always unload half the grapes in that bag. Because Sarah's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't need this many grapes, and they charge too much for them." Can you imagine? I know, I sound very cheap right now. Listen, you got to have a budget, and grapes are in my budget. But if you don't, think about what they would have cost to carry those grapes. That's my thought when I read this. Sorry, I took off a little bit there. But there's two guys carrying this on a pole. Same trip, same evidence, but when they return, what we see two completely different stories. We have 10 spies. 10 spies, they can't stop talking about these giants. Talking about we're grasshoppers in the res. They're talking about giants, giants, giants. But the other two, Joshua and Caleb, what did they keep talking about? God. You see how that narrative is different. Same situation, different narratives. Same facts, different story. The sad thing is because that narrative shaped the direction of an entire generation. And sometimes with us, the greatest obstacles in front of us aren't the size of the problem, it's the story that we tell ourselves about the problem, right? Have you ever done that where it's really not that big of a deal, but by the time you're done, you have written war and peace over this whatever it is that's probably not going to matter. We all do that. You see, our brains are wired to protect us. So in that, they scan for threats all the time. They're like looking for threats, looking for threats, looking for threats. And sometimes what we do is we fill the gaps in with protection mechanisms that aren't healthy, but our brain thinks that they are. You see, what it did is it helped humans, I'm just going to say it, back in the day, survive, because the environments were not quite as cushy as they are right now. So that helped them. But what happens is it has this ability, and maybe you've noticed this, to distort reality. There is no better time to distort reality in my brain than 3 a.m. I don't even know why I picked the phone call up at that point, honestly. Because if I wake up at 3 a.m., my mind, and it's worse as I've aged, it has more problems to think about. Like, I'm going to fix them at 3 a.m. Why would I ever think about who I have to call? Oh, you did that. We do that, though, sometimes. But we think about these things. You see, these are cognitive biases that we have basically created in our brain. You all have them. Everyone has a cognitive bias here. When one small thing happens, suddenly our minds start writing the story, right? You do that even when you walk in. You walk into church, you walk into work, you've already got a story going on. Sometimes we start with some small detail and the story goes south. Catastrophizing, okay? So one problem shows up. Are any of you like this? One little problem shows up, and then suddenly in our mind, like the wheels are falling off. Literally, everything is going wrong. Think about it this way. Your boss comes in and he says, hey, can we talk tomorrow? Oh, man. I'll just go get a box right now. Let's just save you the trouble. I'll pack the box. You know what? I'm not even going to pack the box. I'm just going to leave because you don't even care about me enough you'll probably just throw my stuff away. And after you throw it away, you'll probably give my desk to the person I don't like. But yeah, we can talk. And I'll think about it for the next 24 hours. Thank you for that, boss. We do that with all different kinds of things, though. Think about this one, confirmation bias. Once we start believing something, we begin collecting evidence for it, right? I feel like this happens to me with like vehicles. Like I start to see one vehicle and then all of a sudden I'm like, man, everybody's driving that car. They're all over the place. That's okay maybe, but if you decide that someone doesn't like you or that you have a problem with someone, then all of a sudden it just goes south. Let's say you get a text message that was short or you didn't get a response. From now on, you add all of this together. And every missed hello in the hallway, every slight awkward movement becomes proof in your mind. And what do you say? I knew it. See? You go home, you tell your spouse, I knew I was right about that guy or that lady. So that's confirmation bias. The other thing is emotional reasoning. Maybe this is one of the things that your brain does. This one is powerful because it sounds like this. When I feel afraid, I assume that something terrible must be happening. Or because I feel insecure, I assume that people must be judging me. Or if I feel anxious, I assume that the future must be falling apart. You see, the trouble with all of these, all three of these, is that our feelings start replacing facts. They do. They start acting like that. And before long, we're living this story inside our mind that our minds wrote. Not necessarily anything that's actually true, but it's this ideas that we continue to go on and on and on. Dr. John Deloney says it this way. He says, your brain's primary job is to keep you alive. And then he pauses and he says this, not necessarily to tell you the truth. Your brain lies to you. It does. You see, it exaggerates danger. It remembers pain more vividly than joy. It assumes threats when none exist. And if we're not careful, those thoughts, those distorted thoughts, will start to shape our lives and push us around into different decisions that we would have not made if we would have understood the truth. So if we go back to Scripture, there's this guy named Elijah. And Elijah, he went to battle with a bunch of false prophets. And you can read the story. But it's unbelievable. He has this amazing victory. He actually sets himself up for failure because he trusts God so much, and there's so much victory. And then he goes south pretty fast. You see, he receives a threat from this lady. Her name's Jezebel. And suddenly, this guy who was totally fearless, no problem facing all these prophets, who actually mocked these prophets in a challenge, he collapses under a tree. And he says this, and maybe you've said something like this: I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. To him, that statement felt true. Now, there's a lot more in this story that you can unpack, but it wasn't untrue. You see, later, God told him that there were 7,000 other people who were on the same page as him. But in his mind, he got so lost that he thought he was the only person. He wasn't crazy, though. Elijah wasn't crazy. He was actually exhausted. And when we're exhausted physically, emotionally, or spiritually, our minds, they shrink perspective and they exaggerate threats. See, notice what he did was, he didn't lecture Elijah. He actually let him sleep. And then he fed him. And then only after that does he start to help restore Elijah's perspective. You see, sometimes the most spiritual thing that you can do, and Pastor Josh talked about this last week, is to rest. Because fatigue starts to distort our thinking. I don't really make any good decisions after 8 p.m. Even if we're in board meetings or anything like that late, we don't make big decisions because it just kind of goes down. Emotions come up, my thought process goes down. Because fatigue can distort our thinking. There's another story in Scripture, it's in the New Testament, Elijah was in the Old Testament, where Jesus and his disciples are crossing the sea. A few weeks ago, we talked about the storms of life. And they end up in a storm. A violent storm erupts kind of out of nowhere, and waves crash into the boat. Water begins to fill the boat, the hull. Meanwhile, Jesus, he's just chilling out. He's sleeping. The disciples, they're not. So they wake him and they say this. They say this to Jesus, which is kind of crazy if you think about it from our perspective. They say, "Don't you care if we die?" Oh, did you take that a little far? Don't you care if we drown? Look closely at what happens here. We have this storm, and then we have fear, and then in their minds, what's happening? They're drowning. They die. Because they were afraid, they concluded that Jesus didn't care. That's what they did. You see, what they did was they had a reaction more than a response. And some of you, if you've been in our small group, we've talked about how when we're in a relationship with other people, it's better to have a response than a reaction. Because a reaction is living in our flesh, and a response is living by the Holy Spirit. So because they were afraid, they concluded that Jesus didn't care. Fear created this whole narrative in their head. So they reacted, and then Jesus, what does he do? He calms the storm. He responds. He asks them, "Why are you afraid?" He's not just addressing the storm on the outside, he's addressing the storm on the inside of them. Let's go back to Paul. He knew that this battle for our spiritual lives begins in our thoughts. All throughout the New Testament, we can read that. But he encourages us to focus on what is true. Not what shame whispers. Shame can whisper some really good lies. Not what fear assumes. Not what our past tries to define us by, but by what is true. Some of you need to hear this. Not every thought deserves your agreement. Some thoughts need to be questioned. You can question your thoughts. Some of our thoughts just need to be challenged. And then some thoughts are trash. And they need to be replaced with truth. So when a troubling thought shows up, try asking yourself one of these questions, or even 4 of these questions if you have time. First one is this: what am I feeling right now? Get some soundings. Am I tired? Because if I'm tired, I know my thought process is probably not functioning at 100%. If I'm exhausted, if I'm mad, I don't think as well when those things happen. So what am I feeling right now? And the next question is this: what story am I telling myself about this situation? What have I created that's not factual? Because the next question you're going to ask is this: is this story based on fact, fear, or fatigue? And once you figure that out, you'll be like, okay, now I have some bearings. And the last thing, but you can start with this if you need to: what does God say about this? If you don't know what God's saying about the situation that you're in, the best place to look is the Word of God. Because those questions, they will slow your mind down. Have you ever noticed when fear and fatigue start to go, what happens? You get ramped up a little bit, right? We start thinking and we start having all these ideas, and by the time we're done, we're not sure what's going on. And some of you, that has gotten so out of control that you've ended up in the hospital with a panic attack because you thought you were dying. Now, I'm not shaming you at all, but what if, instead of taking that step, what if we go through this and slow the process down? Now, if you think you're dying, you're having a heart attack, go to the hospital. I'm not saying don't go. I don't want that call. But sometimes we just need to be like, okay, where am I at? What is my thought process doing? You see, these questions here, they create space, which you need. You need a gap. You have the gap, let's put grace in it, but let's also add some truth into that gap. Because they help us come against those false narratives that we're so good at creating and taking root in our mind. And once they start that pathway is ready to go. And it's so easy to feed it, right? So let's look at this. The spies, they wandered because of a narrative. Elijah collapsed because of exhaustion, and the disciples panicked because of fear. In every case that we went over, and we went over 3 different cases, they were not just external, they were internal. Now, I'm not telling you to stop every thought that comes your way. That's not what we're talking about. But I can ask you to take over the thoughts and don't let them control your life. Because you get to pick which thoughts shape your life. That's why the Apostle Paul says in Philippians, whatever is true, think about these things. Because the story that's running through your mind often becomes a story that is shaping your life. And the good news is this: no matter what stories your past has told about you, God is still writing a better one, wherever you're at. If you're here today and you're like, I don't even know what we're talking about, this Jesus thing, I just came into this church just to try it out, this is where a better story begins. We have testimony after testimony after testimony. You see, it doesn't start with perfection. Coach did a phenomenal job at opening this service and saying, you know what, if you think anyone's perfect, you're in the wrong building. We believe that here. But it doesn't start with perfection. It doesn't start with having everything figured out. It actually starts with surrender, with trusting Jesus Christ. That God can forgive your past and reshape your present and lead you into a future that you could never write on your own. Because when Jesus enters your life, he doesn't just give you new thoughts, and those are amazing. But what we've seen today, if anything, with the testimony of Lee Chamberlain, is that he gives you a new story.
I run to clear my head, to outrun the noise, the pressure, the expectations that never slow down. But somewhere along the way I realized you can keep moving and still be falling apart inside. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is stop, breathe, and let Him restore you from the inside out. So, let's stop pretending we're fine and let God do what only He can do.